Okay, so before the break, we were looking at tile sets and image thing. We also looked at that nice, easy to use plugin Cinemachine that's built into Unity. Some of our game engines have things like that, but not all of them. So sometimes we do have to fall back to the scripts, but working with Cinemachine will also give you a good idea of the sort of selection structures that you want to build into your camera follow scripts if you're in an engine that doesn't have those. And following from tile sets, there was one more big thing in the modeling stuff that I wanted to look at. So another quick Blender example, and kind of just the first step on materials beyond colors. I mean, there's a lot we can do because a long ways before we get to Hollywood quality still. But the next little step here is something that I think will be useful, even make your games look a lot better right off the bat, just with some basic stuff in it. And it's starting on that path that takes a lot of practice. Y'all are well aware that video games very much a graphical aspect, right? Most of our coding is fairly simple conditions, right? The examples in the book, that might have went on for a long ways. What we've done in class, other tutorials you've seen, you probably noticed that for a lot of the coding in them is simple selections and simple instructions. We don't do anything super complicated, like if we have a business situation where we have to go access a MySQL database and bring in encrypted data that was salted before it was stuck in the database, and run through all of our fancy decryptions and stuff just so we can do some basic math with those numbers. We don't have any of that really hard stuff. We're doing just basic selection structures, simple steps, and usually not very much at a time because we run so many times per second that we can spread it out over quite a ways. So there's a lot of graphics heavy stuff. Someone wanted to make sure we looked at a few graphics things, and well, the graphics obviously take a lot of practice. So I was thinking tonight, maybe just a quick axe. So I'm going to delete those default ones and I'll make a little axe. So maybe a cylinder for the handle. I'll come over here, pick some numbers, so like 0.3 on the X, 0.3 on the Y, maybe 4 on the Z. Okay, that gives us a nice long axe handle. First part. To get the head on our axe, we can add a cube in here. Hit the move thing. We've kind of seen this before. We get our basic shapes and just kind of move them into what we want. So that'll work for a starting point. I'll go in edit mode. The defaults when we try to export this and bring it into Unity is going to have the Y. Our negative Y is forward. So this side over here is probably the one we want as the cutting edge of our axe. Oh, actually, before I do the cutting edge, I'm going to go back in object mode. And scale, I'll push S to scale, then X to restrict that to only scale on the X axis and make that nice and small where we're going to start at. So it kind of looks like a sledgehammer. Now we can go in edit mode and grab this face in the negative Y direction. E to extrude that out a little. Then S and Z. Whoops, my mouse was in the wrong place. I'm going to hit escape. Move my mouse to a better spot. I like to have little arrows there, kind of like grab things. So I'll grab out here at the end of the arrow, then hit S to scale, and then Z to only scale it in the Z direction. So bring that up, make it a little wider, come over here, and then S to scale and X, so it's only that way, and kind of bevel it down towards the blade a little. And then do the same thing again. E to extrude, bring that out. I'll push S to scale, and then Z, so it's only a vertical scale. There's a nice big thing going there. Then SX to scale the width of that blade down to like the top of an axe. Sort of start there. Did we do rings? I think we did. If we push Control R, it'll cut a ring all the way around there. So if I use the scroll wheel, I can scroll that up to a couple more rings there. Something like that. Move them up and down to adjust them, or right click and accept those just to get some more vertexes here. So now if I grab these vertexes up here at the top, I can move those backwards and start to get kind of a curved edge. Same thing at the bottom, move those backwards, and maybe these move forward to start to get like a curved edge. You can spend a lot more time on that, obviously. Then back here, I'll select this rear face, which probably would have been better beforehand, and extrude that out. I'll just scale this one in every direction so it gets a little bit bigger. Maybe one more. Extrude, then scale that out. Something like that. I guess I could grab these top corners and move those in. Oh, not like that. That probably worked for a start on an axe. Maybe make that narrower. I'll grab all these corners back here. And extrude it one more time, and then this time scale it down to something smaller. Oops, got a little off there. I'm gonna go back because that back side of this is looking kind of funny. I'm gonna go back to there and maybe just grab these top corners and bring them in down a little. Same thing with the bottom, so that it looks more sort of rounded. That'll work. Not the fanciest axe, but again, just moving those vertexes around in space till we get the shape we want. That looks good. And then what we saw before is what I really want to take a step further. We come over here and apply a material. But all we've looked at so far with the materials is colors, and we can do a whole lot more than that. So I'm up here in the top in the menus, and come over to the shading menu. And this is where we get most of our control over the materials. We can do a lot of things. So instead of just a color, I want to add in some textures. So I'm going to go over to Microsoft Paint. This is where I like to quickly create random textures. I'll set sort of a small box here, and I'm just going to draw a box with a random pattern in it. So I'll say no outline and maybe a crown fill. We'll see what this looks like. Oh, and use the secondary color for the fill, and I'll just fill it with that crown shape. Get something there, maybe some yellow on top of that. And I don't know, brown. And I'll just set up a bunch of layers here. Maybe one more green on top. That'll probably work. And it's just sort of a random pattern. Now it needs to be like those tile sets that we just saw, where things line up next to each other. That way this wraps nicely. So what I'm gonna do is set the background color back to white, and hit Control A to select all of them, and copy. So Control C, And now I'll just kind of stretch the canvas area out more and Control V to paste that in. Oh yeah, I guess I could do that. Use the menu. So after pasting it, I'll right click and then flip that horizontally. So now the this edge over here, it's like we just flip that over. So the things line up again. And then when the canvas gets back down to just that right size, the left side and the right side line up now. So we know that if we just kept putting those pictures next to each other, it would cause something that would line up. And same thing again, I'm going to hit Control A to select everything. With it all selected, I can copy it, then deselect it and stretch the canvas out bigger and paste it in. And then that pasted one, flip that vertically so that the top and bottom pixels line up on both of them. I can get that in the right spot. And then when I make it shorter, there we go. Now we have something that the left and right side and the top and bottom sides line up. Actually, I learned that from making the plywood for the interior of Oprah Winfrey's plane. Had a job in a factory and making a plywood factory, and for her plane, it was all black ipe burl. So black ipe is a rare tree from Africa, and a burl is a tumor that grows on a tree. So the grains from a tree tumor are just amazing things to look at, but they're really small. So we had to cut that in veneers and then line everything up so that we had a big 8x4 sheets to cover the interior of a plane. So you have your first one, then you flip it, and then the next, and spin, and then flip and spin them so that they all the corners line up, and then the outer edges line up with the ones next to them. But just draw your pattern, copy it, paste it, and flip it so that those sides line up, and then do the same thing for the top and bottom. You have your thing there, so you copy it and paste it, and then flip it over so that the outer edges will all line up. So that gives us one texture. And even though I picked random colors here, so what I had in mind here is that rough surface of a metal. So where it's like kind of rusted and eaten away over time, but the rusted parts fell off, so we still have a shiny metal, but there's little dimples in it. Or maybe from casting. We can set these different colors to different texture things. We'll see that in a moment. I'll make one more texture and kind of go over that process again. So I'll make a new one. So this is where I usually do for starting points. And you can see it goes really quick. So what I usually do is I'll make like 10 of these and pick the best ones, because it only takes a few seconds. So set it to no outline, and then some random fill color. So for like a wooden handle, maybe a lot of long straight grains. So something like a natural pencil one might work good. So I'll grab natural pencil and maybe start with this light tan, and I'll put some of those on there. Maybe a dark brown, put some of those on there. Maybe one more layer of tan over that. So we get some discrepancy in the colors and some sort of random pattern that it can be worked with. That'll probably work. We'll see what it looks like. We're just kind of going over the steps here. So I'll select all of those and then copy it, deselect it so I can stretch the canvas. Let me switch that back to white. Stretch the canvas and then paste it. And right now it's an exact copy. So if we right click and flip it horizontally, which there's also a flip button up here, that edge will line up nicely there. And this is how we make the tiles for the tile map as well. That's why I thought I'd go ahead and go over this now. It seemed to follow naturally from that. The tiles for a nice tile map would probably be a lot fancier, but it's the same idea. We kind of use copy and paste to make sure our edges line up. You know, maybe it's on, instead of the whole thing, it's only like that much of the edge gets copied over to here. And then those things line up side by side. So again, I'll select all of it, copy it, paste it in there, and then on the copy of it, flip it vertically so that the top and bottom line up. So you can see just a few seconds while explaining it gets that book match thing so that we have those tiles, those images will sit right next to each other. I'll call this texture 2. And that gives us a couple images to work with. There's also lots of things. We could go get a picture of wood grain and use a real picture if we wanted to. So now we can use those to apply a texture along with our material, a textured material, so there's different depth to it. So I'll start with the handle. So I'll select that. And then like we saw before, this is part of the material. So we'll go over here and create a new material. What we saw before was all this stuff here. You know, so now we have this in the shading tab, we have this big option that has the principal stuff and then the material output. And we have different controls over, which if anybody's worked with the standard low code solution on game engines, you probably saw that it looks a lot like this. Was it Blueprint and Unreal and Bolt and Unity, and there's lots of them, but this is the sort of thing artists are trained to work with. The people that dedicate their entire degree to 3D modeling stuff are trained with this sort of low code interface, because obviously we could do this in Python as well. So there's the there's the instruction to create a new material and add that on. So we can do all in code in Python. Sometimes the graphics are nice because there's a lot of things here. It's a lot easier to control from this. So before we would just set the color here and choose a base color, but if we click the little dots beside it, we get this whole big menu, which is directly behind the Zoom thumbnails. So let me move those. Click the little dots, and then instead of a color, that RGB base color, we can also just set the base to a picture, which you'll see over here. We got a whole little node to do that instead of the small ones. So using these nodes, can open this up and just use one of those images just drew. So texture 2 was that wood sort of image. So you can see here it applied directly to it, but I don't necessarily want the colors. That'd be weird on the axe head because that other image was green. That'd be a strange color for an axe head. What I want is the difference in colors, how we have light and dark spots and several things in between. Then we can add, we come over here to add a vector. So you can see there's lots of nodes. We can get different types of inputs, set things to move like hair, and split it up as to particles. So it's moving like a bunch of different water droplets separate. This goes on for a long way. Okay, yes, I've seen Blender Guru. Blender Guru is great. If you look for Blender Guru on YouTube, that just popped up in the chat room. So one of our things we can add under vector is a displacement. Notice we can move these things around and adjust them wherever we want. So instead of this image coming in here as our color for the thing, I'm going to take this image and make that and feed that into the normal of the displacement. Yeah, there's a lot we can do here. This is where the artist really comes in. You'll see why here in a second. So we feed in that image instead of going here, which I can just disconnect that by grabbing it and going off in empty space. So instead of that image going there, the image goes to this displacement vector, which then feeds into the displacement of our material. And you can see already that it gives it some texture. So I can turn up that height a lot, adjust the midpoints on it, scale things in and out, and we get this nice little texture. I guess this one might still look good if we use that as the base color. Yeah, we still had some brown stuff, but maybe not that for the base color. So instead of that for the base color, I'm drag out from here, which I'm not going to do that because that's going to have a bunch of nodes. Move this one over a little, and right click is the panning. So there's a lot of moving things like this. I'll add an input and an RGB input. So I'll just add a color in here. So maybe something brownish, sort of a dark brown. Then I'll make that the base color. So that's the part we saw, but then that random pattern there that all lined up gave us some texture so that it's not a smooth surface. Kind of looks a little bit more like worn wood a little. The same thing for the axe head. So if we go over the axe head, we have to create a new material, but we don't want just a color, we need to get a texture. So our base color, we'll switch that here to an image texture. And instead of the image going in and then immediately feeding out to the color, which will obviously look odd if we just go open that green texture that I just drew. Oh, that's the wrong one. Actually, that looks pretty good for the axe, but I'll use the other one. There's some different things like sword blades. Rough concrete makes really, really good sword blades. There we go. So that texture, that looks odd as colors, but that sort of randomized texture, if we use that, and instead of our image being the color, if we use that as feed that into a displacement vector. So I'll just grab here and sort of disconnect that and take that color to the normal on the displacement, and then feed the displacement into the final material output. And see, we get some nice texturing to it. And then for our color, if we add an RGB input again, so add RGB input, and displacement vectors are the ones you're going to want to start with here, because it gets us nice textures and to add to our colors. Then the RGB input's like what we saw before. So something sort of silvery color. That looks kind of silvery. Make that the base color. It starts to look a little bit more like metal, maybe slightly darker metal. We'll get that texturing. We can adjust, make different adjustments on here, like how deep that goes. 0.1, 0.2, something like that. Cut this down and just adjust it so that we get a little bit of texture along with our color. then that should be something metal. And one of our properties, I have to zoom in here. One of our properties about the BSDF, the material, is metallic. So if we turn that way up, maybe not 100%, something like that, we start to get a bit more of a reflective surface, something a little shinier. Those streaks look odd, but the general idea is there. We can make it more specular so it reflects light better. Where's rough? Turn roughness way down so that it's just almost like polished metal. And you see just that little bit right there made us a much nicer looking axe, right? That might not be the best material. Actually, when I use that same texture on both of them, nope, that's got a lot of streaks in it too. So you can try different ones, just different texture images. And at least that middle part, that looks kind of nice. We can change the way it's laid out. Closest, cubic. Smart. Does smart give us anything good? Not really. Oh, especially if I turn it there, you can see where it starts to look more like metal with that reflective properties and some texture to it. Let's go back to linear. What's this do? I'll leave it like that. You can see there's a lot of different changes we can make. What's extent? Didn't really do anything. But we can get so much nicer materials this way. Along with our, because that's why it's a material, it's not just a color. We looked at the colors before, so we need the color and the texture and maybe some of these other properties like how metallic is it? How rough is it? Because obviously a rough surface isn't going to reflect as well as a smooth surface. That's starting to look more like a good axe handle, whereas our axe head, and then the handle is like wood, so it's not going to reflect light much at all, be very rough. Probably make that even, extend these numbers up even more. And again, kind of play around with the stuff till you get sort of the texture that you like on it. That roughness was too much. Let's turn that back down and make that darker wood, so it contrasts that a little more. And there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of things to change on, but that'll be sort of the next step. So come over to the shading tab, and in your material, add in an image to set up a displacement for roughing and making it a rough surface. And then start thinking about things like how metallic it is, smooth, rough, all these options. Turn up the sheen a little so that it just seems brighter. Make nice shiny metal against that dull wood handle. And make those little adjustments to get the one you want. We have the material view of it. Or under rendering, we do need light. So for the final version, it's going to be, we have a nice rendering pipeline in any of our game engines. That's the main thing we get out of our game engines. So we can add in some sort of light here, like the thing I just deleted earlier. I'll add in a point light. Can't tell where it's shining. I go 100 watts or like 1,000 watts. And kind of adjust the lighting to get the one you want. Maybe I'll just go to sunlight. That way it lights up the whole thing. Okay, that's way too bright. Let's try 100 watts on sunlight. Oh, that's still way too bright. 10 watts on sunlight. And yeah, then adjust all the lighting to kind of get it the way you want it. Rotate that further around. What's the spotlight doing here? And yeah, play around with the lighting and stuff. Obviously, you're probably going to use the lighting in Unity, but you can get way better looking things built up this way. I guess I'll go back to the sunlight. 10 watts of sunlight and move it way up above. Rotate that down. Where the shadows and reflections come in a little bit better. Takes a while to get the lighting set up. The main thing I wanted to look at was this. We're going to use the lighting in Unity anyway. So those, instead of just our material, come over to the shading tab and add in, use an image to add in a displacement, and then set up your base color and some of the other properties. And you can get much nicer looking 3D objects very, very quickly. For those starting out in Unity, that's going to be my suggestion for something to practice with, kind of getting used to it. Because it makes such a difference, right? Whenever we just add a color on there, it kind of looks like a little plastic shape, which isn't quite right. The reason to have nice modeling software is so that we get nice things like this. We could do a much better thing than this, because we could probably do like real wood. Picture of wood. We could find something that's like a real, like an actual image of a wood grain, and then use that for the texture in our handle, or even the color, because it's actually wood. Use that as the image, or try different things, because sometimes just because one thing's, it's a picture of something, doesn't mean it's not going to produce a nice texture if you take all the colors out of it. Some fairly rough or weathered concrete makes a really, really nice looking sword blade. It gives it just the right texture to look like a sword that's been used a lot of times. But that's the basic idea. It's definitely something to practice around with, like the rest of 3D modeling. But those are the two little pieces to add in that will make a really, really, really big difference to your models very, very quickly. All right, save this. Up, and what was this? This was the axe. So I will put this on GitHub. Actually, this one's small. I can put this in the chat room. Where's axe? There we go. So that is in the chat room if you want to go in there and start messing around with that. Oh, you'll need those images. Texture 1 and texture 2. So you can download those files. They will also be on our site, our course GitHub site, and it can really start to make your models look so much better so quickly just by getting rid of that smooth surface. It immediately starts to look more realistic because there's not smooth surfaces in the real world, right? It's very rare. Even when we have something that's very smooth, like glass or ice, if you get in there with start getting there with microscopes and even sometimes magnifying glasses, you'll see that it's not really smooth. It's just smoother than the stuff around it. So texture makes a big difference. So that was the other thing I wanted to cover there. Does anybody have any questions about those?
Yeah, so if you were going to bring that picture as it sits into Unity, would it come in as multiple pieces, or do you have to I guess flatten that image basically?
Oh, yes. So one option is to join it, but then we lose a lot of our editing abilities. So why don't I do that directly? So let's go into a new Unity project. I don't know why there's 3D projects there, isn't there? I could just use one of the ones, but it shouldn't, hopefully won't take too long here. Which that's a great question because of the lighting. Did I get rid of the lighting? So like always, when we bring it into Unity, we don't want to bring in an extra light. So make sure you delete your light and you're just bringing in the model. So save that. So it comes in as pieces, is the short answer to your question, but they are still connected. So I guess the long answer is both, but they're connected, so it does still come in as a single thing. We can treat it as a single thing, and then we still have all that editing ability. Personally, what I like to do is go ahead and join it into a single item to bring into Unity and just have two files, have an editable file, and then a copy where it's been turned into a single mesh to actually use in the game.
Okay, that makes sense. I was wondering about that.
But yeah, to bring it in, there's no animation, so I'll just do the drag instead of the whole export stuff. Oh, not all that stuff. I need to clean out my delete folder. So if we bring that in, put that back to 0, 0, 0. So it's sort of in front of our camera. You can see we have all the pieces. Our material did not come in this way though. Right, so we got one of those just default materials like it has. So we have all the pieces, but we can still treat it as they come in as a child of that object. If we do the export on it, let me come over here and export the FBX. I thought there was some options here for material, and I'm not seeing them now. Empty camera, lamp, armature, mesh, other. So it's probably under other. So I'll just export that and see if we get it in that way. So dragging that FBX file. Doesn't look like either one of them got the material. So that's what I've always done before, and I'm not sure why those materials aren't coming in. So they're on there. Have to bake them on. I'm going to have to look into why those aren't importing in Unity, because always before I would just drag it over and the materials were there. But as it's coming in, it's given just the default material. I don't want to extract those. And it's not letting me edit it either. So I'm going to have to look into why that's not doing it. Yeah, that's going to take me a while to dig through menus and figure out what's changed in the latest update of Unity. But you all can at least start getting some practice with that. And to answer your question, Jacob, it comes in as parent-child. So we still have all the pieces of it. If we wanted to say set up different colliders for the handle versus the head of the axe, we can customize things that way. And I will look into why those materials are not importing like they should. Don't need to save that. It didn't work anyway. Does anybody have any other questions? Okay, I assume the silence means no questions. So that was about what I had on it for tonight. Got some other stuff on Wednesday. We'll start talking about physics or go over physics briefly. We'll talk all we're going to talk about Wednesday night. And then there's a list of things to try and fit in before we run out of time at the end of the semester. But if nobody had any questions, that'll be it for this evening. I'll see y'all later. If you have some questions, you can stick around. I'm going to go ahead and end the video. As always, I'll be sitting here till 8:50, but I think some people had some questions, so I'll be on the Zoom call anyway. But otherwise, see y'all Wednesday. Have a good one.